There are some losses that never heal because you never get to grieve them properly, some separations so absolute you learn to pretend the person never existed just to survive the pain, some siblings torn apart so young they become ghosts to each other, faces remembered from childhood that haunt you but that you've accepted you'll never see again. What happened when 38-year-old Jennifer Walsh walked onto the Family Feud stage with her adoptive family, excited but nervous, completely focused on the game she was about to play? Was that during a commercial break, while she was scanning the audience with the casual curiosity of someone who'd never been on television before, her eyes landed on a face she hadn't seen in 30 years, a face that belonged to her baby brother Michael, who'd been 4 years old the last time she saw him, who she'd been separated from when she was 8, and he was 4 when they were both put into foster care and sent to different homes and told they couldn't contact each other, who she'd spent 3 decades wondering about and grieving and trying to find without success. She stood there frozen as her brain processed the impossible, that her brother, her baby brother who she'd raised more than their drug-addicted mother had, who she'd protected and comforted and promised she'd never leave, who she'd been torn away from 30 years ago, was sitting in the Family Feud audience 15 feet away from her, alive and grown and real. If you've ever lost a sibling to systems that don't care about keeping families together, if you've ever spent decades wondering if someone you loved was alive or dead, if you've ever had to survive by pretending to forget someone you could never actually forget, you need to hear what happened when Jennifer recognized Michael. Before we begin, if you believe that siblings separated by circumstance deserve chances to find each other, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, because we share stories about impossible reunions and love that survives decades of forced separation. Jennifer Walsh was born Jennifer Morrison in 1986 in Portland, Oregon, to a mother named Susan Morrison who was a heroin addict and a father who was never in the picture, never named on the birth certificate, just gone. Susan was 19 when she had Jennifer, 23 when she had Michael in 1990, and both pregnancies were unplanned consequences of her addiction and the chaotic lifestyle that came with it. Jennifer's early childhood was defined by her mother's addiction. Sometimes Susan would be clean and trying, would be present and affectionate, would make promises about getting better. Other times Susan would disappear for days, would leave Jennifer alone or with strangers, would choose drugs over her daughter in ways that Jennifer learned to expect even as a small child. When Michael was born in 1990, 4-year-old Jennifer immediately became his primary caregiver. Susan was using heavily during the pregnancy and after, couldn't be trusted to care for an infant, and Jennifer, at 4 years old, learned to change diapers, to hold bottles to comfort a crying baby while her mother was passed out or gone. By the time Jennifer was 8 in 1994, she was essentially raising her 4-year-old brother, getting him dressed, feeding him whatever food they had, protecting him when their mother's boyfriends were around, keeping him quiet when their mother was high, being the only stable presence in his chaotic life. Jennifer loved Michael fiercely, felt responsible for him in ways that went beyond normal sibling bonds. He called her Jenna because he couldn't pronounce Jennifer, and she called him Mickey because it made him laugh. In August 1994, when Jennifer was 8 and Michael was 4, their mother overdosed in their apartment while both children were there. Michael found her first, woke Jennifer up crying that, "Mommy won't wake up." Jennifer called 911 like she'd been taught, and paramedics came and revived Susan. But the presence of 2 small children in an apartment with a woman who'd overdosed triggered automatic CPS involvement. Jennifer and Michael were removed from their mother's custody that night, placed in emergency foster care while CPS investigated. They were told it was temporary, that they'd go home soon, but Jennifer had a sinking feeling this was different, that this time they weren't going back. Susan, given a choice between treatment and losing her children, chose treatment initially but relapsed within 2 weeks. CPS moved to terminate her parental rights, and Jennifer and Michael became wards of the state, officially available for adoption. The problem was that siblings, especially siblings with trauma histories, were hard to place together. Most foster and adoptive families wanted babies or young children, and taking two traumatized kids together was too much for most people. CPS made the decision that would haunt Jennifer for the rest of her life. They separated the children to increase their chances of being adopted. Jennifer, at 8, was old enough to understand what was happening and to beg them not to separate her from Michael. Michael, at 4, just cried and clung to Jennifer, didn't understand why Jenna, couldn't come with him. In September 1994, Jennifer was placed with a foster family in Portland, and Michael was placed with a different foster family in Eugene, about 110 miles away. Jennifer begged to be able to call Michael, to write to him, to visit him, but CPS policy at the time discouraged contact between separated siblings to help them attach to their new families without being confused by loyalty to biological family. It was cruel policy disguised as best practice, and it meant that Jennifer and Michael, who'd been each other's primary attachment figures, were cut off from each other completely. Jennifer was 8 years old and had lost her mother and her brother simultaneously, and nobody seemed to understand that Michael wasn't just her brother, he was her child in every way that mattered, the person she'd raised and protected and loved more than anyone. Jennifer struggled profoundly in foster care. She was angry, grieving, desperate to find Michael, refused to attach to her foster parents, because how could she when her brother was somewhere missing her? She ran away twice trying to get to Eugene to find Michael, though she had no idea where in Eugene he was, or even if he was still there. She acted out, was labeled a difficult placement, was moved to 3 different foster homes over 2 years. Finally, in 1996, when Jennifer was 10, she was placed with the Walsh family, David and Patricia Walsh, a couple in their 40s who had 2 biological adult children and had decided to become foster parents specifically for older, harder-to-place children. The Walshes were different from previous placements. They didn't expect Jennifer to forget her past or pretend she didn't have a brother. They listened when she talked about Michael, helped her write letters to CPS asking for information about him, supported her grief instead of dismissing it. Over time, Jennifer began to heal enough to function, though the loss of Michael never stopped hurting. The Walshes wanted to adopt Jennifer, and when they asked her permission when she was 12, Jennifer said yes, understanding that being adopted didn't mean betraying Michael or her mother, just meant accepting stability and love from people who'd earned it. She became Jennifer Walsh officially in 1998, though she kept Morrison as a middle name to honor where she'd come from. The Walshes tried to help Jennifer find Michael, requested information from CPS, but were told that Michael had been adopted by a family out of state in 1995, that his records were sealed, that without Michael initiating contact when he turned 18, there was no way to find him. Jennifer was devastated but not surprised. Michael had been 4 years old and adoptable, of course a family had wanted him. Jennifer grew up, graduated high school in 2004, went to community college, became a social worker specifically to help children in foster care, driven by her own experience and by the brother she'd never stopped missing. She married a man named Tom Walsh, no relation to her adoptive parents, just coincidentally the same last name in 2010, had 2 children, a son in 2012 and a daughter in 2015. She built a good life, stable and loving, but there was always a hole where Michael should have been, always a question about whether he was okay, whether he remembered her, whether he ever thought about the sister who'd raised him for the first 4 years of his life. Jennifer tried to find Michael multiple times over the years. She searched adoption registries, used social media, hired a private investigator once, though that went nowhere. The problem was that Michael had been adopted with a new name, new birth certificate, no paper trail connecting him to Jennifer Morrison. Unless Michael specifically searched for her, unless he remembered enough to look for a sister named Jennifer Morrison, they'd never find each other. And Jennifer didn't know if 4-year-old Michael even remembered her clearly enough to search. He'd been so young when they were separated. Maybe she was just a vague memory to him, or maybe he didn't remember her at all. That thought was unbearable, that she'd spent 30 years grieving a brother who'd forgotten she existed. Meanwhile, Michael Morrison, who'd been adopted in 1995 and renamed Michael Chen by his adoptive parents Robert and Linda Chen, had grown up in Sacramento, California, with no knowledge of his biological family beyond what his parents told him, that his biological mother had been unable to care for him, that he'd been in foster care briefly, that he'd been adopted at age 4. Michael had vague, fragmented memories of before adoption, a woman with dark hair who wasn't his mom now, an apartment that smelled bad, being scared, being hungry, and he had one specific memory that he carried his whole life, but didn't fully understand: a girl, older than him, who'd held him and fed him and called him Mickey, who'd told him she loved him and would always protect him. He remembered her face vaguely, remembered feeling safe with her, remembered the day he was taken away, and she'd been crying and holding him and promising she'd find him, but the memory was fragmentary, confused, the kind of early childhood memory that you're not sure is real or something your brain constructed. Michael's adoptive parents were loving and supportive, gave him a stable childhood, encouraged him to explore his adoption story if he wanted to. When Michael was a teenager, he asked if he'd had siblings, and his parents told him the truth: yes, he'd had an older sister, but she'd been placed in a different home when he was adopted, and they didn't have information about where she was. Michael, 16 years old and suddenly understanding that the vague memory of a girl who'd protected him was real, asked if he could search for her. His parents supported this, helped him register with adoption reunion registries, helped him search social media for Jennifer Morrison, but they found nothing, probably because Jennifer was now Jennifer Walsh, and unless Michael knew that, he was searching the wrong name. By 2024, Michael was 34 years old, married to a woman named Sarah, with one young daughter, working as a teacher in Sacramento. He'd never found his biological sister, had accepted he probably never would, but he thought about her sometimes, wondered if she remembered him, if she was okay, if she ever thought about the little brother she'd taken care of 3 decades ago. In September 2024, Michael and Sarah took a trip to Los Angeles for a long weekend, just to get away, see the city, have some time without their daughter who was staying with grandparents. While browsing things to do, they saw that Family Feud taped in LA, that you could get free tickets to be in the audience, and Sarah thought it would be fun. Michael agreed. They got tickets for a Friday afternoon taping on September 27, 2024, thinking it would be a casual, fun thing to do. Jennifer, meanwhile, had been encouraged by her adoptive family to apply for Family Feud as a fun activity. Her adoptive parents, David and Patricia, were aging. David had health issues, and they wanted to do something memorable as a family. Jennifer's adoptive sister, Emily, the Walsh's biological daughter, who was significantly older than Jennifer, thought Family Feud would be perfect. They applied in July 2024 and were selected to tape in September. The team would be Jennifer, her adoptive parents David and Patricia, her adoptive sister Emily, and Emily's husband. Jennifer's husband Tom and her biological children couldn't come due to scheduling conflicts, but Jennifer was excited anyway, thought this would be a way to honor the family that had saved her, the Walshes who'd given her stability when she'd had none. On September 27, 2024, Jennifer and her family arrived at the Family Feud studio for their taping. They went through hair and makeup, were briefed on the game, were excited and nervous. Michael and Sarah arrived at the same studio as audience members, were seated in the audience, thought nothing of it beyond this being a fun tourist activity. Jennifer and Michael were in the same building, separated by 30 years and about 50 feet, and neither knew the other existed nearby. The taping started. Steve Harvey came out, the games began. Jennifer's family played their match and won, which meant they'd come back for another game. During the break between games, while the previous losing family was leaving and Steve was talking to the audience, Jennifer looked out at the crowd with the kind of casual curiosity of someone scanning faces, just taking in the experience of being on television. Her eyes swept across the audience, taking in strangers' faces, and then her gaze stopped, locked on a man sitting in the third row. For a moment, Jennifer's brain couldn't process what she was seeing. The man was in his 30s, Asian features suggesting he'd been adopted by an Asian family, but his face, his expressions, the way he held himself, there was something familiar, something that triggered a memory so deep Jennifer felt dizzy. She stared, trying to place why this stranger felt familiar, and then several things happened simultaneously in her brain. She remembered 4-year-old Michael had looked vaguely Asian, even though their mother had been white. The father they'd never known must have been Asian. She remembered Michael's face at 4 years old, and she realized with absolute certainty that the man sitting in the audience was her brother. Jennifer made a sound, not quite a scream but a gasp of shock so loud that people around her turned to look. Her hand went to her mouth, her eyes locked on Michael, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the impossibility of this. Steve Harvey, in the middle of talking to the audience, noticed Jennifer's reaction and stopped mid-sentence. "Jennifer, you okay?" But Jennifer couldn't answer, couldn't look away from Michael, could only stare as her brain screamed that this was him, this was Michael, her baby brother who she hadn't seen in 30 years, sitting in the audience of Family Feud. Steve walked over to Jennifer, concerned. "Jennifer, what's wrong? Do you need to sit down?" Jennifer finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "That's my brother. That man in the third row, that's my brother Michael. I haven't seen him in 30 years. Steve's face showed he thought he'd misheard. "What? Say that again." Jennifer, louder now, pointed at Michael. "That man right there in the blue shirt, third row. That's my brother Michael Morrison. We were separated in foster care when I was 8 and he was 4. I've been looking for him for 30 years. That's him. That's my brother." The studio went completely silent. Steve Harvey stood frozen, paralyzed, unable to move or speak as his brain tried to process what Jennifer was saying. Michael, in the audience, had heard Jennifer say his biological last name, Morrison, and was staring at her with growing shock on his face. Sarah, his wife, whispered, "Michael, is that—" Michael stood up slowly, his voice shaking, calling out across the studio, "Jenna, is that you? Are you Jennifer Morrison?" Jennifer started crying, nodded frantically. "Yes! Yes! I'm Jennifer Morrison! I'm your sister! Mickey, I'm your sister!" She used the nickname she'd called him 30 years ago, and Michael made a sound like he'd been punched, the nickname triggering memories he'd carried but not fully trusted. The girl who'd called him Mickey, who'd held him and fed him, and promised to protect him. He started moving toward the stage, Sarah following, and Jennifer started moving toward him, and Steve Harvey stood paralyzed, watching this impossible reunion unfold in real time. Jennifer and Michael met at the edge of the stage, and Jennifer threw her arms around him, sobbing, "Mickey, Mickey, I've been looking for you for 30 years. I never stopped looking. I never forgot you." Michael was crying too, holding his sister who he'd last seen when he was 4 years old, whose face he'd carried in fragmented memories his whole life. "Jenna, I remember you. I've always remembered you. I didn't know how to find you. I thought you'd forgotten about me." Jennifer pulled back to look at him, her hands on his face. "Forget you? I raised you for the first 4 years of your life. You were my baby. I never forgot you. Not for a single day." Steve Harvey finally unfroze, but instead of resuming the show, he sat down right there on the stage floor, overwhelmed by what he was witnessing. The crew had stopped recording, everyone just watching this reunion. After several minutes, Steve found his voice, though it was shaking with emotion. "Can someone explain to me what's happening? Jennifer, this man is really your brother. The brother you haven't seen in 30 years. Jennifer, still holding Michael's hand like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go, explained through tears. "My brother and I were put in foster care when I was 8, and he was 4. Our mother was a drug addict, she overdosed, and CPS took us. They separated us because they said it would be easier to adopt us separately. I was placed in Portland, he was placed in Eugene, and then adopted and moved out of state. I've been searching for him since I was 12 years old. I've used registries, social media, private investigators. I never found him, and now he's here in the audience on the same day I'm on Family Feud. This can't be coincidence. This is— I don't even know what this is." Steve turned to Michael. "And you've been looking for her too?" Michael nodded. "Since I was 16. When my adoptive parents told me I had a biological sister. I registered with reunion sites. I searched social media for Jennifer Morrison. I never found her. I didn't know she'd been adopted too and changed her name to Walsh. We were both searching, but we couldn't find each other because the system doesn't make it easy, because adoption records are sealed, because—" He broke down, couldn't finish. Steve Harvey stood up, walked over to them, and spoke with a gravity that showed he understood the magnitude of this moment. Do you all understand what we just witnessed? These two siblings, separated 30 years ago by a foster system that thought separating them was best practice, have been searching for each other for decades. Jennifer has been Jennifer Walsh for 26 years, so when Michael searched Jennifer Morrison, he couldn't find her. They've been looking for each other and missing each other, both living their lives wondering if the other remembered them, if they'd ever meet again. And today, by absolute chance, they're both here at a Family Feud taping in Los Angeles, and they recognized each other. He turned to the audience and crew, his voice breaking. This is not television. This is sacred. This is two people who loved each other, who were torn apart as children, who've spent 30 years grieving the loss of each other, finally being reunited. We're going to give them time. We're going to give them space. And we're going to be grateful we got to witness this because reunions like this don't happen. The odds against this are astronomical. Over the next hour, with the taping postponed indefinitely, Jennifer and Michael sat together and pieced together their lives. Jennifer learned that Michael had been adopted by the Chen family in Sacramento, had grown up happy and stable, but had never forgotten the sister who'd raised him during his first 4 years. Michael learned that Jennifer had become a social worker because of him, because of the system that had separated them, that she'd named her own daughter Michelle partially in honor of him. They exchanged phone numbers, addresses, photos of their families. They marveled at the impossibility of this moment, that they'd both happened to be at Family Feud on the same day, that Jennifer had looked at the audience at the exact right moment, that she'd recognized him after 30 years. Sarah, Michael's wife, explained that the Los Angeles trip had been last minute, that they'd almost not come, that getting Family Feud audience tickets had been a spontaneous decision. Emily, Jennifer's adoptive sister, said that their father David had almost been too sick to travel, that they'd almost canceled. The margin between this reunion happening and not happening had been so small, so many tiny decisions that could have gone differently. Steve Harvey, witnessing all of this, kept saying, "This is divine intervention. This is meant to be. You two were supposed to find each other today." The episode never aired in its normal format. Instead, Family Feud created a special segment about the reunion, with Jennifer and Michael's permission, that told their story, showed the moment of recognition, included interviews with both of them about the 30 years of separation and what this reunion meant. The segment aired 2 months later, and was viewed over 800 million times globally, becoming one of the most watched Family Feud moments in history. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people separated from siblings by foster care or adoption reached out, sharing their own stories, asking for help searching. Adoption and foster care reform advocates used Jennifer and Michael's story to push for policy changes that would keep siblings together, that would make reunion registries more accessible, that would recognize the harm caused by separating siblings. Reunion registries reported massive surges in people searching for lost family members. In the year following the reunion, Jennifer and Michael's families became close, visiting regularly, their children becoming cousins, 30 years of separation giving way to building new connections. They still grieved the lost time, the childhood they should have shared, the decades when they'd wondered about each other. But they also celebrated finding each other, against astronomical odds, through what seemed like pure chance, but felt like something more. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that families torn apart by systems deserve chances to reunite, that sibling bonds can survive decades of separation, and that sometimes impossible reunions actually happen, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe to our channel, because we share stories about love that survives when everything tries to destroy it, about people who never stop searching, about reunions that seem impossible until they happen. Jennifer Walsh recognized her brother Michael in the Family Feud audience after 30 years of separation, after decades of searching, after accepting she might never find him, when she pointed at him and said, "That's my brother." When Steve Harvey stood paralyzed by the impossibility of this reunion, when Jennifer and Michael embraced after 3 decades apart, We all witnessed something that restored faith in the possibility of impossible things. They'd been separated by a system that didn't value keeping siblings together, had spent 30 years wondering if the other remembered them, had searched without success because adoption had given them different names and sealed records and obstacles that seemed insurmountable. But on September 27, 2024, in a Family Feud studio in Los Angeles, Jennifer looked at the audience at exactly the right moment and saw her baby brother's face, and 30 years of separation ended in an instant. That's why Steve Harvey was paralyzed, why the show stopped, why everyone watching understood they were witnessing something more important than television. The power of love to survive when nothing else does, the possibility of finding what was lost, the miracle of recognition across 3 decades and 50 feet.